Mr. Holt, we're going to start out with Mark Twain and the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And this is the first line in that novel. Read it for us.
You don't know about me without you have read a book by the name of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, but that ain't no matter.
And one of the cool things about this book is that it actually speaks in the voice of an adolescent boy. And so Ernest Hemingway, remarking on this, says,
all modern American literature comes from one book by Mark Twain called Huckleberry Finn. American writing comes from that.
But what we're going to look at is actually a sentence that comes before that sentence. It's a sentence that's in the disclaimer to Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. So Mark Twain writes a disclaimer at the top of this book, or the beginning of this book, and he uses a technique that we're going to call the touch of Twain. So we're just going to give you this disclaimer without the touch of Twain. So this is what he wrote, and then I'll show you what he did write, and we'll talk a little bit more about what this move is. So read the first one.
Persons attempting to find a motive in this narrative will be prosecuted. Persons attempting to find a moral in it will be banished. And persons attempting to find a plot in it will be shot.
Okay, so this is what he actually wrote. So this is with the touch of Twain move. Read this.
Persons attempting to find a motive in this narrative will be prosecuted. Persons attempting to find a moral in it will be banished. Persons attempting to find a plot in it will be shot.
So he just removes the conjunction. And it has this effect. You can see it a little bit better in a letter he writes to another writer, I think editor of The Atlantic, William Dean Hannell. So this is with the touch of Twain. You take out that conjunction. We've been seeing the conjunction at the end of the Rule 3. You can take it out for a neat little effect. So read this, Mr. Holt.
Munich did seem the horriblest place, the most desolate place, the most unendurable place.
And then compare that to what would happen if you just use a regular sentence.
Munich did seem the horriblest place, the most desolate place, and the most unendurable place.
And with the first one, there's more of a rhythm to it. You see how that just kind of builds and builds and builds on top of each other? Think about this book, Mr. Holt. So this book is, if you had a bad title of it, would be called this.
Eat, Pray, and Love.
But the actual title is
Eat, Pray, Love.
Right, because if you do the first one, Julia Roberts isn't going to do your movie. But the second one, it seems like, wow, that's got a nice ring to it. Here's a nice sentence from Jhumpa Lahiri. Mr. Jordan, you want to read it for us?
Pet names are a persistent remnant of childhood, a reminder that life is not always so serious, so formal, so complicated.
Or from Joyce Carol Oates.
It can be argued that all essays are an expression of the human voice addressing an imagined audience, seeking to shift opinion, to influence judgment, to appeal to another in his or her common humanity.
And we can see underlying it is that our Rule 3. The first two are short, then you can slide something in. That's really, really nice. But again, our thing is legal writing. Does this happen in good legal writing? Roth versus the United States, one of the fundamental obscenity cases. A guy named William O. Douglas, which you don't have to agree with the opinions, but if you want to learn about good legal writing, read his opinions. He writes really great sentences. Mr. Jordan.
Any test that turns on what is offensive to the community's standards is too loose, too capricious, too destructive of freedom of expression to be squared with the First Amendment.
And we know this isn't an accident if we read the next sentence.
Under that test, juries can censor, suppress, and punish what they don't like, provided the matter relates to sexual impurity or has a tendency to excite lustful thoughts.
And so we know that he's choosing effectively. He's not just slipping into bad grammar. He's saying, here's a place where I want to stress it in this way. Here's a place and where I want to do something different. Really famous example, the Gettysburg Address. A lot of people point to this as the best piece of American writing, partly because it's so damn short. Let's read from it, Mr. Jordan.
We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives, that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hollow this ground.
Touch of Twain. There's no and there. There's no conjunction. We all repeat these phrases, but now we're starting to understand that ring. That's what we want to do with this workshop. It's not enough just to say, that's a great phrase. If you can see why it's a great phrase, then again, you can create a great phrase of your own. Still more, same Gettysburg Address.
It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, and that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth.
Hey, it's a phrase we all know. Now we're starting to understand why. All right, so touch of Twain, the actual name for this is a synditon, which is a terrible name if you're trying to teach undergraduates, because no undergraduate will remember a synditon. But essentially, it is without conjunction. But because it's a terrible name, we're trying to be better marketers for the English language. We call it the touch of Twain. There's also polysyndeton. So if a syndeton is taking out conjunctions, polysyndeton adding conjunctions. And for that, again, no undergraduate is going to come back to me and say, oh, remember that thing that was really cool? It's called polysyndeton. No one's ever going to say that. But what they do say is, I really like this writer, Neil Gaiman, and he does this cool thing in his writing. Maybe we'll call it that. So what we're going to learn with the polysyndeton is something we're going to call the Gaiman graph.